don't like the word the global south as usually used for these regions, because that is definitely quite a diverse community of the countries. And because of these, many of them had different experience, different alliances and partnerships, different political preferences as for now. So we have an extremely diverse picture. What we definitely know that Russia been actively working for the last 30 years in all these countries, doesn't matter right, left, democratic or more autocratic, Russia been working because they had the diplomatic presence, what Ukraine didn't have in many of these countries, and didn't have the enough capacity and money to be present in terms of the political, in terms of the visits, in terms of the contacts, in terms of the soft power and public diplomacy. So now we're de facto trying to catch up with what we've been neglecting for many years. At the same time, we have countries that clearly immediately realized what is happening and took the strong position, like Japan. Here, no questions. What is interesting, Guatemala suddenly became one of the leaders in the Latin American region who understood, joined Crimean platform, and we had our friends. With other countries, the problem was originally that we thought they just understand what does mean the rules-based order, human rights, and how important that is. We underestimated that Russia played perfectly on the anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism in many of these countries, and also presenting it as anti-imperialism. So all that Soviet narrative that worked well, meaning that Russia is against empires, not Russia is empire. And the question when we started to speak that Ukraine being a colony of Russia for centuries, and we even received the surprise, like, you know, eyebrows in Africa, you are white, you cannot be a colony. So on the certain moment, we needed to reframe our narratives and starting explaining. We just realized that, first of all, many of these countries are not supporting Ukraine just because they don't know what is happening. Because they are perfectly living at the certain information bubbles. Many of the information agencies are just reposting Russian information agencies because they're free of charge compared to Reuters, for example. Yeah. So it's just came naturally, and we need to break this wall. And for this, what we really need to do is to go there and to speak directly with these people, because sometimes we don't feel nuances, what touch people, what don't touch. A big surprise for me was, for example, that India, being a nuclear country, doesn't want to speak about nuclear security. They are not interested in this topic. That's not the topic that really touches them. But at the same time, they were absolutely open to speak about food security. Even that we thought originally, I mean, yeah, our assumption that food security is probably more the question for the African countries. Then you came with some, I mean, that's really so many nuances and details that without coming to the region, without speaking directly with these people, you would not be able to feel the moods and to understand the needs and what are the common topics. We suddenly received a very interesting support from Singapore, who was very interested in disinformation and in maritime security. Small country, but they understand that because of their ethnic composition, because of their neighbors, because where they are, there is two spheres where maybe they don't care what is happening in Ukraine, but they care about experience of Ukraine. So we can speak from how we can be useful for you by sharing our lessons learned and experience. It's not that we need to share the threat, because when you come to many countries, they openly says, but do you understand that you are not a global conflict for us? You're a regional conflict. So explain us why we should care about you. Yeah, morally we understand that that is bad, that you have refugees, you have destruction, everything. Yeah, Russia is bad, but why should we care? And that's to find these nuances, why they should care, what are those interesting elements, and what are the transnational or even transcontinental effects. That's how we are getting these countries, because with many Southeast Asian countries, for example, we started to explain that we understand that China is bigger threat for you than Russia. You de facto don't care about Russia. But look, China is now learning the lessons from Russia, both in terms of tactics, how war can be conducted, but also in terms of the international reaction. So they are looking, okay, sanctions are not effective, or what mechanisms we can, preventive mechanisms implement, so your sanctions would not be effective to us. Or, okay, we understand that West would not go after this. Yeah, that is their limit in terms of actions. Why not to try? Let us try to do this, or this. So, all of these, and suddenly they start opening like, okay, so you think that China can go, let's say, attacking, yeah, it can be hybrid actions or direct, if Russia is winning, because they understand that the West is weak and are not capable of facing this. We said, yes, we already see the indicators, and you have a switch. Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk now. Maybe we can help. So that is probably now we are in this period of, search, of experiencing, of trying, of learning, but not only telling. And that is the huge difference between probably our activities before 2022 and now, because originally we were coming just advocating. Now we are coming to learn, so to understand how we can be useful and interesting to each other. South Korea is not openly supplying us with any ammunition yet. That's what we are working on. They try to do it through the third countries because according to their legislation, they cannot do it to the country in war. And even in South Korea, where we've been in December, I cannot say that the position is so strict. On the one hand, they are absolutely recognizing Russian aggression and that Ukraine is a victim and Ukraine needed to be supported. But at the same time, they are not imposing a lot of sanctions against the Russian Federation. Or they are looking at the situation as, okay, but we can continue trading or doing some of other stuff. So they are still trying to balance, also partially because of China and because of North Korea, they're trying not to spoil relations with Russia that much that Russia would destabilize situation in their region. And that is the fear of a lot of countries, especially in Southeast Asia. With Japan, that's a little bit easier because let's not forget that Japan is still, from the legal point of view, in the state of war with Russia after the Second World War. But at the same time, they don't have the armed forces. So there are also limits to what they can supply to us. What still can be done from the region? There are not so many countries that can supply us with what Ukraine needs. Because we don't have so many Asian countries that are producing weapons. They've been usually the buyers of even Ukrainian weapons. But some of them are important trade partners, and you understand that we need the economic activity. We need their voices in the United Nations and other organizations. That's very important. What is much more important, we need them to join sanctions because Russia is using a lot of these countries to bypass sanctions of the European Union and the US. They are using these countries for the gray export, and they are using these countries for the supply of the technologies that are important for the weapons production, such as microchips, for example. And the last but not the least, many of these countries bought in the past the Soviet ammunition and equipment. So now Russia is trying to buy it back, and sometimes even very, very old equipment, like last year it was the contract that they bought in Cambodia, the weapons that de facto been produced in 1950s. But who cares? If it is the tank, this tank is driving, so it can be used at the battlefield.
There is no limit for Ukraine to go on with not only Euro-Atlantic reform agenda, but also continuing to will to be a NATO member. But we have to talk about specific member states inside the NATO and the political willingness of the NATO to accept Ukraine. That's, I believe, it's something that you are asking And we, as Ukrainians, asking ourselves, so when, how, under which perspectives. Of course, everyone from Ukraine, civil society in particular, looks on the July agenda. July is the time for annual, but this time very memorial 75th NATO Washington summit. And we were thinking, so apart from writing the security assurances with Ukraine, US could make a much more of a message, not only NATO member states, but united with the member states to other parts of the world, saying that not only Ukraine will be a member, but Ukraine will be a member of NATO when and how. That's the precision framework. So when, how, it means by which conditions. Yeah, that's something that we are very much expecting and working on intensively with our partners as a civil society organization, think tank in other countries, with the organization, for example, but with others from the NATO member states, in order to make sure that we elaborate this understanding and the timely concern that we already talked about. Because, yes, we already have a Vilnius communique or Vilnius declaration last year when the annual NATO summit was taken on, with the perspective of Ukraine somehow, when we don't know, to become a NATO member state. But we want to make sure that it happens already, and there are already not only economic but also political preconditions to that. Of course, our eyes look more to what we say Atlantic partner of NATO, United States in particular, where the concerns are that Ukraine is not ready and it might be ready to join NATO only after or when Ukraine wins and have a full victory. And this precision to have a full victory itself and to win, that's something that we as Ukrainians see as already being a precondition of being a member state of NATO. So it should happen in a parallel tracks. I want to maybe foresee some of the questions that, Sergei, you might think, or your audience who will be listening to this podcast in particular might see. Well, there is a kind of a stereotype, or at least it used to be a stereotype before, that the expansion of NATO was the precondition why the Russian Federation attacked Ukraine, right? So it was a very common knowledge for a lot of communities in 2022, but also in 2023. As a picture now in 2024, I might say two arguments that are against that. Firstly, Finland already became a partner, or actually a member, to be precisely, of NATO, so expanding its borders, and NATO literally being on the borders with the Russian Federation, but Sweden as well. Did something happen to them? Not at all. So it means that this idea that sometimes politically blocks, or sometimes some expert societies blocks to the vision to have a full victory of Ukraine, at least to help Ukraine in order to gain this full victory. We say that these arguments that the expansion of NATO was used as something why the Russian Federation attacked shouldn't be the argument as well in 2024. The argument should be why Ukraine is not still winning with all together. So what it makes sure, or how to make sure that Ukraine not only wins but have a full victory. These, I believe, are the key questions that we should ask our Western partners. But we as Ukrainian experts make sure that we are providing necessary not only questions but answers to that. We are definitely ready to both receive the military aid and supports and supply of all possible ammo, but also far-launch missiles, in particular that you mentioned. Your country, in Germany, is making intensive debates whether to exchange the Taurus to the British Storms, and then to, in such a way, to overcome, let's say, the political shape and political discussions or dilemmas for some of the representatives still to support Ukraine on time. Because as a matter of fact, Sergei, it's very important that we do that on time and as soon as possible. And it's not about as long as it takes formula, it's now. And as you know, when we are talking about military cooperation in particular, and planning and delivery on time is a kind of a very essential thing to support not only the militaries but also civilians in Ukraine, which are literally making sure that each and every drone attack or missile attack is not hitting their homes for this moment. And that's why political dimension of the discussions, which ammunition, but also in particular which military aid to provide to Ukraine. It's something that has been long debated, and that's why the length of this discussion sometimes is immeasurable. In Ukrainian framework, time is a very different concern, and we make sure that our response is making it as quick as possible. Of course, we definitely understand the partners in the West that will take much more time politically to negotiate and discuss these matters in particular. I only mentioned Germany, but it's not only the one country that we have to talk about. Of course, UK, we have to talk, and then a priority for, let's say, creative approach sometimes that even the Minister of Foreign Affairs, David Cameron, was making it sure that talking to her vis-a-vis Annalena Baerbock, making sure that this request for the exchange of the missiles was never something done before. So it's a very creative approach, the partners thinking about the future of Ukraine and also their future to some extent. Of course, here is the talks about France and his again announcement in the upcoming weeks to still visit Kyiv. As you know, the visit was planned to be in February, but then was cancelled. Still, after the talks with Volodymyr Zelensky himself with President Macron, make sure that President Macron will make it happen. So we literally think that this visit is not only political momentum of when France and Ukraine signed the security assurances, but it's a kind of a concrete, what we say, how these security assurances are making sure they are transformed into the action plan. Action plan with concrete deadlines, concrete, let's say, indicators, and concrete cooperation in this sense. We know that our partners from the Baltic states and Poland are making their efforts to do so as well. And it's not a secret that Baltic states representatives, in particular Estonia now, where Kit is coming from, is elaborating the framework for the security assurances with Ukraine. So something that we expect more countries, in a nutshell, in March, April and May, to sign with Ukraine the security assurances, which are sometimes politically said as security guarantees, but to make sure that it's not somehow the same thing that we are talking about. And we have to mention also one more partner, which is definitely from the Scandinavian in Sweden and Finland and Norway. So three countries from the, let's say, Scandinavian profile, which important to mention, not only Finland, but now Sweden is a member of the NATO, so we do have the Baltic states being protected by what we say NATO Lake. So the cooperation with this country intensifies with Ukraine, also with security assurances, but also military aid that these countries are providing. But on the south side, from what we say the old members of the EU, Italy is one of the very interesting partner now, trying to elaborate its framework, not only politically, but also, as we understand, economically, how to boost presence of its efforts. And just on another side, very important question here to answer is not only the military aid, but how Ukraine will be able to economically recover. When we're talking about the procurement system, and of course the how the ammo, if we talk about the ammo, let's say, should be produced and then supplied to Ukraine, it takes definitely time, and the preparation for that should have been started, which is the case. But it's true that those, let's say, ammos that already been delivered to Ukraine, they were in stock of the countries that were providing them. And they vacated their stock, that's for sure. That's why EU is thinking about enhancing their industrial defense capacity, as we know. And there is also the strategy to do that, and there is also an idea to have a special commission on that, an open office in Kyiv. What stops that? Well, interest, definitely, as we say, sometimes political interest, because it provokes also the questions simultaneously to many European communities who, as we know, also go on elections, apart from not only United States, potentially UK as well, we don't know, we will know in the upcoming weeks, to explain the question of conscription, because if we expand the defense capabilities and productions, and potentially politicians are not sometimes ready to answer the questions of conscription, for example, so to boosting the production. Is it only for Ukraine, or is it how it potentially might be used and for what? The societies in Europe, I'll be talking in Europe in general, it's not only EU, they are very much accommodated with the democracy, and sometimes democracy makes it so comfortable, which we definitely understand, and that's what Ukrainians truly want. But in order to be potentially safeguard this democracy, we need these capabilities to be present. And it also involves training of personnel, because capabilities without personnel and thinking about logistical chains, how they're going to be supported and supplied, that's something that should be considered as well. War is mathematics as well, so it's definitely about numbers, how much of what and when. So the time concern, the volume concern, but also the times when the production lines can be elaborated. That's something that is on our agenda as well. And to make this very, maybe my vague answer to you, but at the same time with some concrete messages, Ukrainians are very open, and we do believe that military production in Ukraine is one of the solutions. But we also need the transition solutions as of now, because in order to win as soon as possible, we need already the solutions to be elaborated and being implemented now. And this term now is not as soon as it takes, but it's now already definitely as a very something concrete. So that's why my prospects for 2024, which might be, it is a challenging year for sure, is that when the political leaders are coming to Ukraine and making their discussions, we are discussing a very concrete action plans in these concerns and in these domains in particular.
Important to remember that the war started 10 years ago, not 2 years ago, so we actually are into the 11th year of conflict. And after 11 years, with Russia having every advantage, they still only control 20%. Their Air Force and Navy have failed in all of their critical tasks, and 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. So I would not focus so much on yet last year's counteroffensive, but step back from the map and think about where we are. And this was done without a strong, decisive commitment from the United States to help Ukraine win. So I actually am quite optimistic. I think that, Russia is actually in deep trouble. Now, three things. Number one, we have to make it clear that we want them to win, that it is our strategic objective that Ukraine wins. Germany has to do the same thing. Make it very clear, and then provide the support that's needed for them to win. Number two, Ukraine needs long-range precision strike capabilities that will enable them to make Crimea untenable, and that will neutralize Russia's advantage of mass. That means the capability to destroy artillery, headquarters, logistics at long range. That's a capability that we should provide them. And then the third thing, Ukraine is going to have to fix their personnel system. They've got enough people, but they don't have enough soldiers. And so this is going to require political decisions, political fixes, changing laws, and then for the government in Kyiv to explain to Ukrainians why they have to get more people to expand the size of the army so that they can have enough units to rotate. First of all, we should recognize that these are threats, bluster, and it's a part of the Russian repertoire or their arsenal. Just like artillery, just like rockets, is disinformation. constantly threatening people. And I think we in the West should quit overreacting to all of these threats, be firm in our resolve, be clear in our objective, and then push back on it. The Russians will complain every time we do, but they actually only respect strength. When we cower or like, oh, we don't want to provoke, that just makes them want to do more. And I don't understand why we still have a hard time acting with confidence and decisiveness instead of always worrying that we might provoke them.